My billionaire ex-husband's engagement party stopped cold when I walked in with his secret baby. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, my heart thundering as 200 pairs of eyes locked onto me and the baby in my arms. The string quartet had gone silent. Champagne glasses hung mid-toast. Across the room, Mason's face drained of color as he recognized me, then his gaze dropped to the infant in my arms. He crossed the marble floor in long strides, the crowd parting like water before him. "Emily." His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to introduce you to someone," I said, lifting our daughter slightly. "This is Olivia Jane. Your daughter. She's 7 months old." "That's not possible." His hands trembled as he stared at the baby with his identical gray eyes. "Mathematically, it's quite possible," I replied. "She was conceived a week before you disappeared from my life." His fiancée appeared beside him, her diamond ring catching the light like a warning flare. "Who is this?" she demanded, her perfect smile brittle. "This is my ex-wife," Mason said, his voice hollow. "And apparently, my child." The room erupted in gasps and whispers as Mason's mother seized my arm. "We need to discuss this privately. Now." But I already knew I'd just detonated a bomb in the center of Mason Everett's perfectly controlled world, and there would be no containing the blast. Thank you for joining me on Mr. Arden's Heart Stories. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice about family, or faced someone who abandoned you when you needed them most, this story will resonate with you. Like and subscribe now to join our community of over 10,000 viewers who find comfort and courage in these real stories of love, loss, and redemption. The gold-leafed invitation had arrived like a missile into my ordinary life 3 days earlier, its heavy cream paper stock and embossed lettering announcing a celebration I had no desire to witness. The envelope bore no return address, but I recognized the distinctive calligraphy Vera Sinclair's signature touch. I'd received her wedding invitations often enough in another lifetime. "Mason Everett and Portia Calloway request the honor of your presence as they celebrate their engagement." I wasn't supposed to receive this invitation. Someone had made a mistake, a cruel clerical error that landed this gilded bomb in my modest mailbox on Larimer Street. In the 2 years since Mason had walked away from our marriage with nothing but divorce papers and vague explanations about different paths, I'd carefully constructed a life he couldn't touch. Yet here was the invitation, and along with it, the devastating confirmation that Mason had moved on entirely. While I rocked our daughter to sleep each night, he'd been building a future with someone new. Our daughter. The secret I never told him. The child conceived during our last desperate attempt to salvage something already broken. I studied Olivia's sleeping face in the dim glow of her nightlight. 7 months old, with my unruly copper hair but Mason's solemn gray eyes and the same stubborn chin that had stared out from countless business magazine covers. An Everett through and through, though she bore my surname Riley. "He doesn't deserve to know you," I whispered, stroking her velvet cheek. But as the invitation sat on my kitchen counter for days, radiating its presence like background radiation, the truth became unavoidable. This wasn't about what Mason deserved. It was about what Olivia deserved. A father. Resources beyond what my photography studio could provide. Medical history. Identity. The decision crystallized one morning as I watched her grip her stuffed elephant with fierce determination, those gray eyes focused with an intensity that was painfully familiar. I would go to the engagement party. And I would bring our daughter. The Archer Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a shimmering wonderland of white orchids and crystalline light. Outside, early autumn rain pelted Boston's upscale Back Bay neighborhood, but inside was climate-controlled perfection. I stood in the lobby, heart hammering, adjusting Olivia's tiny velvet dress, a splurge I couldn't afford but needed for courage. "You look beautiful, little one," I murmured, more to calm myself than her. The door attendant glanced at my invitation, then at the baby carrier, eyebrows rising slightly before professional courtesy smoothed his features. "Welcome, Miss Riley." I took a deep breath and stepped into the lion's den. The room fell silent in segments, like a wave of quiet spreading from my point of entry. Conversation stuttered to a halt, champagne glasses paused mid-toast, string quartet notes faltered. I felt every eye turn toward me, the ex-wife, the uninvited guest despite the invitation, the woman who didn't belong in this world of old money and corporate power. And then I saw him. Mason Everett stood across the room, tall and imposing in a tuxedo that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. At 38, he'd grown more distinguished since our last encounter, silver threading at his temples, laugh lines deeper around his eyes. His arm was draped around a willowy blonde whose diamond engagement ring caught the light like a distress signal. His expression when he saw me cycled through shock, confusion, and irritation before settling into the cool mask I knew so well. But when his gaze dropped to the baby carrier, everything changed. The mask slipped, revealing raw disbelief as those gray eyes identical to the ones blinking sleepily in the carrier widened in recognition of what was unmistakable. The hush deepened as Mason crossed the room in long, deliberate strides. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before him, whispers building in his wake. Emily. My name sounded strange on his lips after so long. What are you doing here? I lifted my chin. Congratulations on your engagement. His jaw tightened. You shouldn't be here. I received an invitation. I held his gaze. Apparently someone thought I should witness your happiness. Before he could respond, Olivia chose that moment to let out a bright gurgle, her tiny hands reaching up toward the chandelier's sparkle. Mason's eyes snapped to her, and I watched something profound shift in his expression. Who is this? He asked, voice suddenly hoarse. Your daughter, I said simply. Olivia Jane Riley. She's 7 months old. The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the quartet had stopped playing. That's not possible, he whispered, but his eyes said otherwise. They couldn't leave Olivia's face, cataloging the evidence that even he couldn't deny. Mathematically, it's quite possible, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She was conceived a week before you left. A tall woman in a midnight blue gown approached Portia Calloway, I presumed. She was elegantly beautiful, with a politician's practiced smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. Mason, darling, aren't you going to introduce me? Her voice carried the refined accent of old Boston money. Mason looked like a man caught between worlds, unable to process what was happening. Portia, this is Emily. My former wife. How lovely, Portia said with glacial politeness. Her gaze dropped to Olivia, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. And who might this be? Before Mason could answer, his mother appeared at his side. Victoria Everett had always been a force of nature contained in perfect posture and pearls. She took one look at Olivia and inhaled sharply. This conversation needs to happen somewhere private, she said with the authority that had built Everett Investments into a global powerhouse. Now. As Victoria led us toward a private anteroom, I caught a glimpse of Portia's face. The composed mask had slipped, revealing something raw and furious beneath. In that moment, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just about telling Mason he had a daughter. I had detonated a bomb in the center of multiple lives. But it was too late to retreat. Have you ever wondered how one moment can change everything? Press that like button now if you've experienced a life-altering decision that couldn't be undone. Explain yourself. Victoria's voice was steel-wrapped in silk as she closed the door behind us. We stood in what appeared to be a small library, wood-paneled and insulated from the murmuring crowd outside. Mason hadn't spoken since we'd left the ballroom, his eyes fixed on Olivia as if she might disappear if he looked away. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, I replied, unhooking Olivia from her carrier and cradling her against my shoulder. Mason has a daughter he didn't know about. And you chose his engagement party to reveal this information? Victoria's tone could have frozen flame. How remarkably convenient timing. I didn't know about the engagement until I received the invitation, I said. Someone sent it to me. I certainly didn't, Victoria snapped. Nor did I, Mason finally spoke, his voice rough. The guest list was handled by the event coordinator. Well, someone wanted me here. I met his gaze directly. Perhaps they thought you were entitled to the truth before you started a new family. Mason ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look more like the man I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, before Everett Investments consumed him. May I hold her? He asked quietly. The request caught me off guard. I'd prepared for anger, for accusations, for denial. Not for this simple, human desire that stripped away everything but the fact of fatherhood. I hesitated, then carefully transferred Olivia to his arms, showing him how to support her head. His hands dwarfed her tiny body, trembling slightly as he adjusted his hold. Olivia stared up at him with solemn curiosity, reaching one chubby hand toward his face. Something broke open in Mason's expression: wonder, grief, recognition. She has my mother's chin, he whispered, glancing at Victoria, whose own composed facade was cracking at the corners. And your eyes, I added softly. Exactly your eyes. Victoria moved closer, peering at her granddaughter with reluctant fascination. The Everett brow, she murmured. Unmistakable. The door opened without warning, and Portia stood framed in the doorway, her perfect composure now visibly strained. She took in the tableau: Mason holding the baby, Victoria hovering close, me standing slightly apart and her lips thinned to a tight line. I see we're having a family reunion, she said, voice brittle. The guests are wondering what's happening, Mason. He looked up, still cradling Olivia with unexpected natural ease. Portia, I need a moment here. You've had several moments. Her gaze flicked to me with undisguised hostility. This could have been handled any other day, through lawyers, like civilized people. Portia, Victoria interjected smoothly, perhaps you could inform the guests that we're dealing with an unexpected family matter. Ask the quartet to resume playing. We'll rejoin shortly. It was a dismissal, expertly delivered. Portia hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining her dignity and demanding answers. Fine, she said finally. But Mason, we will discuss this tonight. After she left, Mason carefully returned Olivia to me, his reluctance evident in every movement. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, the question weighted with months of absence. You made it very clear our marriage was over, I replied. You said you wanted a clean break, no entanglements. A child is not an entanglement, he said sharply. I didn't know I was pregnant when you left, I countered. And by the time I found out, you'd already filed for divorce and were unreachable except through your attorneys. You could have told them. Your lawyer, Raymond. The man who suggested I might be fabricating emotional distress to increase my settlement. I shook my head. I tried calling your personal number. It had been changed. Mason had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was a security measure after the Forbes profile ran. How convenient, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. When I couldn't reach you directly, I made a choice. I decided to have this baby and raise her myself, without the Everett complications. Then why are you here now? Victoria asked, her analytical mind cutting to the heart of the matter. I looked down at Olivia, who had fallen asleep against my shoulder, trusting and vulnerable. Because she deserves to know her father, I said quietly. And because keeping her existence secret was becoming its own complication. I didn't want her to grow up wondering, or to discover the truth when she's older and resent me for the choice I made. Mason turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the rain-slicked streets below. His reflection in the glass showed a man grappling with seismic revelations. I have a daughter, he said, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. Yes. And you named her Olivia. He turned back to face me. After my grandmother. I nodded. I remembered how much she meant to you. Something in his expression softened fractionally. She has your hair, he observed, reaching out to touch one copper curl that escaped from Olivia's headband. Poor child, I said with a faint smile, remembering how he used to tangle his fingers in my unruly waves. A charged silence filled the room. Victoria broke it, ever the pragmatist. "We need to address the immediate situation," she said. "There are 200 people out there, including board members, potential investors, and the Calloway family, who have just witnessed something that will be gossip fodder by morning." "I didn't come here to create a scandal," I said. "Intention and consequence rarely align," Victoria replied crisply. She turned to her son. "Mason, you need to make a decision about how to proceed tonight. Do you acknowledge this child publicly, or do we handle this privately first?" Mason looked at me, then at Olivia, his expression troubled. "I need to speak with Emily alone." Victoria nodded, years of boardroom negotiations reflected in her composed exit. As the door closed behind her, leaving us truly alone for the first time in 2 years, I felt the weight of everything unsaid between us. It hadn't always been this way. Once, we'd been so deeply in love that the differences in our worlds hadn't seemed to matter at all. I met Mason Everett on the worst day of my professional life. I was 24, a newly certified photographer struggling to establish a reputation in a city saturated with talent. That afternoon, I'd arrived to shoot a wealthy client's daughter's sweet 16 party, only to discover my camera's memory card was corrupted. Every test shot I took rendered as digital garbage. "My career is over," I mumbled, slumped on a bench in the public garden, frantically searching for a replacement card I could afford. "That seems like a rather dramatic conclusion," came a deep voice behind me. I looked up to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit watching me with amused gray eyes. I was in no mood for condescension. "Unless you happen to have a high-speed professional memory card in your pocket, I'm not interested in your opinion," I snapped. To my astonishment, he reached into his briefcase and produced exactly that. "Will this do?" he asked, holding out a card still in its packaging. I gaped at him. Why would you carry?" "I'm heading to an acquisition meeting for a tech company that specializes in digital storage," he explained. This was part of my research materials. I stared at the card, then at him. "Are you an angel or a hallucination?" He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed at odds with his Wall Street appearance. "Neither. I'm Mason Everett." I should have recognized him, then his family's company was well known even to someone as financially oblivious as I was, but all I saw was the kindest stranger I'd ever met. "I can't take this," I said. "It's ridiculously expensive." "Consider it an investment," he replied, placing it firmly in my hand. "You can repay me by showing me your work sometime." I hurried to the party, shot the event with the miraculous card, and thought that would be the end of our encounter. 2 days later, as I was editing the photos in my tiny apartment, a messenger arrived with an envelope bearing the Everett Investments logo. Inside was a business card with Mason's private number and a handwritten note. "I meant what I said about seeing your work. Dinner tomorrow?" I almost didn't call. Men like Mason Everett didn't date women like me without an agenda. But curiosity won out, and I dialed his number, prepared to politely decline whatever proposition he might offer. Instead, we talked for 3 hours about everything from Renaissance painting techniques to the ethical implications of AI development. By the end of the call, I'd agreed to dinner. By the end of dinner, I was already falling for him. Our courtship was like something from a modern fairy tale. Mason showed up at my cramped studio with coffee and pastries, fascinated by my work process. I infiltrated his executive meetings with homemade sandwiches when he forgot to eat. We debated philosophy in upscale restaurants and politics in dive bars. He taught me about investment strategies. I taught him how to see light and shadow in ordinary moments. The differences in our backgrounds became a source of delight rather than division. I took him to farmers markets and street festivals. He introduced me to symphony galas and wine tastings. When he brought me home to meet Victoria, his formidable mother studied me with surgical precision before declaring that I, at least, seemed unlikely to be interested in the Everett fortune. "I believe you might actually like my son," Victoria said over tea served in cups worth more than my monthly rent. How refreshing. Mason proposed 6 months later, on the same bench where we'd met. I found it wildly fast. He called it efficient decision-making. "I know what I want, Emily," he said, kneeling despite his expensive suit. "And I want a life with you." The wedding was a compromise smaller than the society event Victoria would have preferred, more formal than the bohemian celebration my artist friends expected. We honeymooned in a secluded villa in Santorini, where Mason shocked me by turning off his phone for entire days at a time. "I didn't know you could physically separate from that thing," I teased, watching him swim in the infinity pool that overlooked the caldera. "You're the only connection I need right now," he replied, pulling me into the water with him. Those early years were incandescent. We moved into a brownstone in Beacon Hill, Mason's choice, though he gave me complete freedom to transform it into a home that reflected both of us. I converted the top floor into a photography studio and began building a clientele among Boston's elite, introduced through Mason's connections but earning their respect through my talent. Mason's star rose rapidly at Everett Investments. His innovative approach to sustainable investment strategies earned him industry recognition and his mother's grudging approval. We traveled when we could, collected art that spoke to us both, and built a life that seemed invulnerable to the pressures around us. If you've ever found love in an unexpected place, or bridged two completely different worlds to build something beautiful together, hit that like button and comment Bridge Builder below. Your support helps stories like these reach more people searching for hope. The cracks appeared so gradually that I almost didn't notice them at first. It began with longer hours at the office. Mason's team was developing a revolutionary investment fund focused on climate technology, and the pressure to deliver was intense. Dinners went cold, weekend plans were cancelled, and the vibrant conversations that had defined our relationship became abbreviated exchanges between his meetings and my shoots. "I recognize that look," Victoria said during one of our increasingly rare family dinners. Gregory had it too, before he left. Mason's father had abandoned the family when Mason was 12, leaving Victoria to raise him alone while keeping Everett Investments afloat. It was a wound that had never fully healed. "I'm not my father," Mason said sharply, the first time I'd ever heard him speak to Victoria with anything but respect. "No," Victoria replied, studying him over her wine glass. "You're more talented. Which makes you more vulnerable to the same obsession." I tried to be understanding. Mason's work mattered not just to his family legacy but to the causes we both believed in. When he finally returned home each night, exhausted and preoccupied, I made sure the brownstone remained a sanctuary. If he couldn't make it to dinner, I left carefully plated meals in the refrigerator. When he missed gallery openings or friends' gatherings, I made excuses and brought home stories to share. I scheduled my shoots around the rare windows of time when he could surface for air. "I'm sorry," he would say, genuine regret in his eyes. "This phase won't last forever." "I believe you," I would reply, and I did. Mason had never given me reason to doubt his word. Until the medical issue. It started with a routine physical for a new executive insurance policy. Mason came home early that day, something so rare I immediately knew something was wrong. "The doctor wants to run some additional tests," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The tests led to more tests, to specialist appointments Mason attended alone despite my offers to accompany him, to hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. "What's going on?" I finally demanded after weeks of this shadow dance. "If something's wrong, we face it together." That was our agreement. He looked at me for a long moment, something like grief in his eyes. "It's not what you think. I'm not dying or seriously ill. It's complicated." "Complicated is not an explanation, Mason." He seemed about to say more, then his phone rang his mother, with a crisis at the office that required his immediate attention. The conversation was shelved, then buried beneath more work emergencies and my own busy season with summer weddings. In retrospect, I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded answers. But I had always respected Mason's autonomy, his right to process difficult things in his own way. It was one of the foundations of our relationship: mutual respect, space when needed, support without smothering. I never imagined he was pulling away deliberately, creating distance by design rather than circumstance. 3 months after those mysterious medical tests, Mason came home at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks. He suggested we open a bottle of wine we'd been saving and sit on the rooftop terrace. Something in his manner too casual, too rehearsed, set alarm bells ringing. "This is about the medical tests, isn't it?" I said as we settled into the outdoor furniture. "Whatever it is, just tell me." He looked out over the Boston skyline, his profile sharp against the setting sun. "It's not just about that. It's about us, Emily. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our future." Relief flooded me. Finally, we were going to have a real conversation about what had been happening. "Me too," I said eagerly. "I know we've both been busy, but I miss us. Maybe we should plan a trip, like Santorini, Emily." His voice was gentle but firm. "I need some space to reevaluate my priorities." The words hit me like a physical blow. Space? What does that mean? "It means I think we need to spend some time apart," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "We want different things. We're moving in different directions." "Since when?" I demanded, anger beginning to replace confusion. "What different things? What different directions?" "This morning we both wanted avocado toast for breakfast. Last month we both agreed on donating to that climate initiative. When exactly did we start wanting different things?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me, Mason. Make it make sense." But he couldn't or wouldn't. He talked in circles about personal growth and changing priorities and paths diverging. Corporate platitudes that conveyed nothing of substance, from a man who had once shared his most intimate thoughts with me. "I'm going to stay at the company apartment for a while," he finally said. "Give us both some space to think." "I don't need space to think," I said, tears now flowing freely. "I need my husband to talk to me." But his mind was made up. He packed a suitcase with mechanical efficiency, promised to call the next day, and left me standing in our bedroom, surrounded by the life we'd built together, with no real understanding of why it was suddenly falling apart. He didn't call the next day. Or the day after. When I tried reaching him, his assistant informed me that Mr. Everett was in meetings and would return my call at his earliest convenience. 5 days after he walked out, I received an email from him suggesting I visit my sister in Chicago for the weekend. When I returned Sunday night, half his belongings were gone from the brownstone, removed with surgical precision as if our 8 years together could be so neatly bisected. 2 weeks later, his lawyer contacted me. Mason was filing for divorce and offering a generous settlement. The brownstone would be mine, along with a financial package that would ensure I never had to worry about money again. All he asked was a clean break, no extended negotiations, no messiness. I fought it, of course. Not the divorce itself. I wouldn't force a man to stay married to me who so clearly wanted out, but the complete absence of explanation. I demanded a face-to-face meeting, a chance to understand what had happened to us. Instead, I got Raymond, Mason's shark of a lawyer, who suggested that my emotional distress, while understandable, was not a legal basis to delay proceedings. The clear implication was that I should take the money and disappear quietly from Mason Everett's life. The divorce was finalized with record speed, my attempts to reach Mason consistently thwarted, my questions left unanswered. I signed the papers in a fog of grief and incomprehension, watching 8 years of love reduced to notarized signatures and court stamps. I didn't take the brownstone. I couldn't bear to live in the space we created together, every room haunted by memories. Instead, I used part of the settlement to buy a small commercial building in a gentrifying area of South Boston, photography studio on the ground floor, modest apartment above. A fresh start, uncontaminated by the past. I threw myself into work, building my business, reconnecting with friends who'd taken a back seat during my marriage. I adopted a three-legged rescue cat named Admiral who greeted me with enthusiastic purring each night. I was, by all external measures, doing remarkably well for a woman whose husband had vanished from her life with the abruptness of a magic trick. But at night, I still searched for answers, scrolling through photos of our life together, looking for the moment when everything changed. When Mason decided we wanted different things. When I became disposable. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I discovered I was pregnant. The irony was excruciating. For years, Mason and I had carefully planned our future, first establishing our careers, then starting a family when the timing was right. Now, after he'd walked away, after he'd destroyed everything we'd built, his child was growing inside me. I sat on my bathroom floor, staring at the positive test, and laughed until I cried. My first instinct was to call him. Whatever had happened between us, Mason had a right to know he was going to be a father. I reached for my phone, scrolled to his contacts still there, though now marked with an innocuous EX, and hesitated. What would I say? How would I even reach him? Every attempt at communication during the divorce had been intercepted by gatekeepers or ignored entirely. Why would this be any different? And if I did manage to tell him, what then? Would he swoop back into my life for the sake of the child, motivated by duty rather than love? Would he try to assert control, use his vastly superior resources to influence or even gain custody? Or worse, would he react with suspicion, question the timing, suggest I'd somehow planned this to trap him? Every scenario I imagined led to pain and conflict, at a time when I needed stability and peace more than ever. I made an appointment with my doctor, confirmed the pregnancy, and learned I was about 8 weeks along. The timing aligned perfectly with our last night together, a rare evening when Mason had come home early, when we'd shared a meal and wine and fallen into bed with the easy familiarity of longtime lovers. I hadn't known then that it would be the last time. The doctor gave me pamphlets outlining my options. I read them all, considered each path carefully. Despite the complications, despite the uncertainty of single motherhood and the pain of Mason's abandonment, I wanted this baby. This child conceived in the last embers of a once great love. But I still needed to tell him. No matter how difficult the conversation might be, Mason deserved to know and make his own choices about involvement. I drafted careful texts, composed emails, even wrote old-fashioned letters, searching for the right words. None of them felt adequate to the magnitude of the situation. Finally, I decided on directness. I called Mason's direct line at Everett Investments, prepared to leave a message if necessary. "I'm sorry, but that number is no longer in service," an automated voice informed me. I tried his cell phone. "The number you have reached has been changed or disconnected." Growing increasingly frustrated, I called Everett Investments' main line and asked for Mason Everett's office. "I'm sorry, miss, but Mr. Everett is not taking calls," the receptionist said with practiced politeness. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "It's a personal matter," I replied. "I'm his ex-wife." A pause, then, "I'll transfer you to Mr. Dawson's office. He handles Mr. Everett's personal affairs." Raymond Dawson. The divorce lawyer. A cold, calculating man who had treated me with barely concealed disdain throughout the proceedings. "Emily Riley," he said when he picked up, voice as warm as a bankruptcy notice. "To what do we owe this unexpected contact?" "I need to speak with Mason," I said, determined to remain professional. "It's important. I'm afraid Mr. Everett is unavailable. His schedule is quite full with the European expansion. Perhaps I can assist you. This is a personal matter that needs to be discussed directly." "Miss Riley," Raymond sighed with exaggerated patience. "The divorce settlement was quite clear about creating a clean break between you and Mr. Everett. If you're experiencing financial difficulties, I'm pregnant," I blurted, patience exhausted. "The baby is Mason's. That's why I need to speak with him." A long silence followed. "I see," Raymond finally said, his tone shifted to something more calculating. "And when did you discover this condition?" "About a week ago. I'm approximately 8 weeks along." How convenient, he remarked. Just after the divorce was finalized. The insinuation was clear, and it ignited my temper. If you're suggesting I got pregnant deliberately, you're not only wrong but disgusting, I snapped. The baby was conceived before Mason left. Before he decided to end our marriage without explanation. These are significant allegations, Miss Riley. You understand we would require verification. Verification? I echoed in disbelief. You want a DNA test for a baby that hasn't even been born yet? Once the child is delivered, yes. In the meantime, I suggest discretion. Making public claims about paternity could be construed as defamation. I'm not making public claims. I'm trying to tell the father of my child that he's going to be a parent. I'll pass your message to Mr. Everett, Raymond said, his voice returning to its professional chill. If he wishes to respond, he'll contact you. But he didn't. Days passed, then weeks. No call, no email, not even a formal letter from the lawyer. The silence was deafening and damning. Either Raymond had never conveyed my message, or Mason had received it and chosen not to respond. As my first trimester progressed, bringing with it morning sickness, exhaustion, and the first flutter of attachment to the life growing inside me, I made a decision. If Mason didn't care enough to even acknowledge my message, I wouldn't force him to be a father. My child deserved better than reluctant obligation or, worse, complete indifference. I would raise this baby alone. Without the Everett name, without the Everett money, without the Everett complications. My child would know love and security and consistency, everything Mason had promised and then withdrawn without warning. I wrote one final letter, sent to Mason's office by certified mail. Mason, I'm pregnant with your child. I due in May. I've tried to reach you through every available channel and received no response. I can only conclude that you don't wish to be involved, which is your choice to make. I won't be contacting you again about this matter. If you change your mind and want to be part of your child's life, you know how to reach me. Emily. The return receipt came back signed by an assistant. I never heard from Mason. If you've ever had to make the difficult choice to walk away from someone who couldn't meet you halfway, tap that like button now. Your story matters, and your strength deserves to be recognized. As my pregnancy progressed, I rebuilt my life around the coming baby. I converted my apartment's spare bedroom into a nursery, painting clouds and stars on the ceiling myself. I adjusted my photography business, focusing on studio portraits rather than lengthy event shoots that would be difficult with an infant. I took prenatal classes alone, surrounded by couples holding hands and sharing nervous smiles. My sister Kate flew in from Chicago regularly, attending doctor's appointments when she could, helping me assemble nursery furniture and prepare freezer meals for after the birth. My parents, though concerned about the circumstances, rallied around me with practical support and love. What about the father? Strangers would inevitably ask, eyeing my ringless finger. Won't he be involved? He's not in the picture, I would reply, the phrase becoming easier with repetition. Financial reality soon set in. While the divorce settlement had been generous, I'd invested most of it in my studio building, and babies were expensive. I worked double shifts throughout my second trimester, booking as many clients as possible before my due date, knowing income would be uncertain afterward. I rarely allowed myself to think about Mason during those months. When his name appeared in business news, Everett Investments expanding to Singapore, Mason Everett named to Forbes 40 under 40, I scrolled past quickly, refusing to dwell on the parallel life that continued without me. But at night, as the baby grew more active, turning and kicking as if demanding attention, I couldn't help wondering what Mason would think if he could feel these movements. If he would be fascinated by the biological miracle, calculating developmental milestones in that analytical mind of his. If he would talk to my belly in the same serious tone he used for business presentations, explaining investment strategies to our unborn child. You're better off without that complexity, I would tell the baby. We both are. But I didn't fully believe it. Olivia Jane Riley arrived on a stormy May morning after 26 hours of labor. She came into the world angry and vocal, her tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight. "She looks like you," Kate said, peering down at the red-faced newborn in my arms. "That hair is definitely the Riley curse." But I could see Mason everywhere, in the shape of her eyes, the determined set of her chin, the way she studied the room with uncanny focus for a newborn. She was half him, whether he acknowledged her or not. The first few weeks passed in a blur of sleeplessness and adjustment. Breastfeeding proved challenging, Olivia had trouble latching, and I spent tearful nights with lactation consultants and pump equipment. The cat, Admiral, appointed himself her guardian, sleeping beside her crib and alerting me with loud meows when she stirred. I recovered slowly from the birth, more exhausted than I'd ever been, more in love than I'd thought possible. Olivia became the center of my universe, not in the self-sacrificing way motherhood is often romanticized, but in the gravitational sense. She was the mass around which my life now orbited, altering my trajectory in ways I was still discovering. One afternoon, as Olivia napped in her swing and I frantically edited photos for a client deadline, I found myself staring at the phone, Mason's contact still in my favorites despite everything. With the irrationality of sleep deprivation, I took a photo of Olivia peaceful in slumber, one tiny hand curled beside her face, and almost sent it to him. "Your daughter," I would have captioned it. "The one you didn't want to know about." But bitterness wouldn't serve either of us. I deleted the unsent message and returned to work. As the weeks became months, Olivia grew from a fretful newborn into a determined infant. She hit milestones early, lifting her head with surprising strength, tracking movement with those solemn gray eyes, reaching for objects with deliberate focus. She rarely cried without cause, preferring to observe her surroundings with an intensity that visitors found unnerving. "She's an old soul," my mother declared during a visit. Just like her father, I thought but didn't say. At 4 months, I returned to work full-time, arranging childcare with a retired teacher who lived in my building. I scheduled shoots around Olivia's nap times when possible, wore her in a carrier during client consultations, and edited photos with her sleeping on my chest. We developed a rhythm, imperfect but functional. Sometimes, in rare quiet moments, I would study her features and wonder if Mason ever thought about the possibility of a child. If he ever regretted walking away so completely that he'd missed the chance to know her. If the medical issues that had preceded our split had somehow related to children, to family planning, to the future we'd once mapped out together. But those thoughts led nowhere productive. Mason had made his choice, multiple choices, each taking him further from us. I had to focus on the life in front of me, not the questions left behind. Until the gold-edged invitation arrived, shattering the careful separation I'd maintained between past and present, between the woman who had loved Mason Everett and the mother Olivia needed me to be. The engagement party was in 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to keep Olivia's existence private, as I had for 7 months, or to bring our worlds crashing together in what would certainly be a public and painful collision. One evening, as I bathed Olivia in the kitchen sink, she loved water, kicking and splashing with unbridled joy. I studied her features for the 100th time. The Everett brow, the determined chin, those eerily familiar eyes. She was becoming more recognizably his daughter every day. "What's the right thing to do, Admiral?" I asked the cat, who supervised bath time from his perch on the counter. "Keep her all to ourselves or introduce her to the complications of being an Everett?" Admiral blinked slowly, offering feline wisdom I couldn't translate. "WH. What do you think, sweet pea?" I asked Olivia, who responded by slapping the water and drenching my shirt. "Not helpful, little one." But as I lifted her from the bath, wrapped her in a towel emblazoned with ducks, and carried her to the nursery, the answer crystallized. This wasn't about Mason or me or our failed marriage. It was about Olivia's right to know her father, to have access to her heritage and extended family, to make her own decisions about those relationships when she was old enough. Whether Mason wanted to be involved was his choice. But he deserved the chance to make that choice based on complete information I had withheld. The night before the party, I laid out our clothes, my one good dress, a deep emerald that brought out the copper in my hair, and the velvet baby outfit I'd splurged on, knowing I couldn't afford it but needing the armor of proper appearance. I packed the diaper bag with military precision, extra clothes, bottles, diapers, wipes, toys, blankets. Preparation as an antidote to anxiety. When Olivia finally fell asleep, I stood over her crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, and whispered, "Tomorrow you meet your father. I don't know if he'll love you immediately, like I did, or if he'll need time to adjust to your existence. I don't know if he'll want to be part of your life or if he'll walk away again. But whatever happens, you will always have me. Always." In the morning, I dressed us both with trembling hands, secured Olivia in her car seat, and drove to the Archer Hotel with my heart in my throat and the invitation on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. "You can do this," I told myself as I handed my keys to the valet. "For her." And I stepped into the hotel lobby, ready to detonate the careful fiction that Mason Everett had no living connection to Emily Riley. "Explain yourself." Victoria's voice was steel-wrapped in silk as she closed the door behind us. We stood in what appeared to be a small library, wood-paneled and insulated from the murmuring crowd outside. Mason hadn't spoken since we'd left the ballroom, his eyes fixed on Olivia as if she might disappear if he looked away. "I think it's fairly self-explanatory," I replied, unhooking Olivia from her carrier and cradling her against my shoulder. "Mason has a daughter he didn't know about. And you chose his engagement party to reveal this information?" Victoria's tone could have frozen flame. "How remarkably convenient timing." "I didn't know about the engagement until I received the invitation," I said. "Someone sent it to me." "I certainly didn't," Victoria snapped. "Nor did I," Mason finally spoke, his voice rough. "The guest list was handled by the event coordinator." "Well, someone wanted me here." I met his gaze directly. "Perhaps they thought you were entitled to the truth before you started a new family." Mason ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look more like the man I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, before Everett Investments consumed him. "May I hold her?" he asked quietly. The request caught me off guard. I prepared for anger, for accusations, for denial. Not for this simple, human desire that stripped away everything but the fact of fatherhood. I hesitated, then carefully transferred Olivia to his arms, showing him how to support her head. His hands dwarfed her tiny body, trembling slightly as he adjusted his hold. Olivia stared up at him with solemn curiosity, reaching one chubby hand toward his face. Something broke open in Mason's expression: wonder, grief, recognition. "She has my mother's chin," he whispered, glancing at Victoria, whose own composed facade was cracking at the corners. "And your eyes," I added softly. "Exactly your eyes." Victoria moved closer, peering at her granddaughter with reluctant fascination. "The Everett brow," she murmured. "Unmistakable." The door opened without warning, and Portia stood framed in the doorway, her perfect composure now visibly strained. She took in the tableau: Mason holding the baby, Victoria hovering close, me standing slightly apart and her lips thin to a tight line. "I see we're having a family reunion," she said, voice brittle. "The guests are wondering what's happening, Mason." He looked up, still cradling Olivia with unexpected natural ease. "Portia, I need a moment here." "You've had several moments." Her gaze flicked to me with undisguised hostility. This could have been handled any other day, through lawyers, like civilized people. "Portia," Victoria interjected smoothly, "perhaps you could inform the guests that we're dealing with an unexpected family matter. Ask the quartet to resume playing. We'll rejoin shortly." It was a dismissal, expertly delivered. Portia hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining her dignity and demanding answers. "Fine," she said finally. "But Mason, we will discuss this tonight." After she left, Mason carefully returned Olivia to me, his reluctance evident in every movement. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question weighted with months of absence. You made it very clear our marriage was over, I replied. You said you wanted a clean break, no entanglements. A child is not an entanglement, he said sharply. I didn't know I was pregnant when you left, I countered. And by the time I found out, you'd already filed for divorce and were unreachable except through your attorneys. You could have told them. Your lawyer, Raymond. The man who suggested I might be fabricating emotional distress to increase my settlement. I shook my head. I tried calling your personal number. It had been changed. Mason had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was a security measure after the Forbes profile ran. How convenient, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. When I couldn't reach you directly, I made a choice. I decided to have this baby and raise her myself, without the Everett complications. Then why are you here now? Victoria asked, her analytical mind cutting to the heart of the matter. I looked down at Olivia, who had fallen asleep against my shoulder, trusting and vulnerable. Because she deserves to know her father, I said quietly. And because keeping her existence secret was becoming its own complication. I didn't want her to grow up wondering, or to discover the truth when she's older and resent me for the choice I made. Mason turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the rain-slicked streets below. His reflection in the glass showed a man grappling with seismic revelations. I have a daughter, he said, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. Yes. And you named her Olivia. He turned back to face me. After my grandmother. I nodded. I remembered how much she meant to you. Something in his expression softened fractionally. She has your hair, he observed, reaching out to touch one copper curl that escaped from Olivia's headband. Poor child, I said with a faint smile, remembering how he used to tangle his fingers in my unruly waves. A charged silence filled the room. Victoria broke it, ever the pragmatist. We need to address the immediate situation, she said. There are 200 people out there, including board members, potential investors, and the Calloway family, who have just witnessed something that will be gossip fodder by morning. I didn't come here to create a scandal, I said. Intention and consequence rarely align, Victoria replied crisply. She turned to her son. Mason, you need to make a decision about how to proceed tonight. Do you acknowledge this child publicly, or do we handle this privately first? Mason looked at me, then at Olivia, his expression troubled. I need to speak with Emily alone. Victoria nodded, years of boardroom negotiations reflected in her composed exit. As the door closed behind her, leaving us truly alone for the first time in 2 years, I felt the weight of everything unsaid between us. You should have told me, he said again, softer now. Yes, I admitted. I should have found a way. But I was hurt and angry, Mason. You left without warning, dismantling our life together like it was a business acquisition gone bad. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened. You decided our marriage no longer fit your 5-year plan and liquidated the asset. He flinched. Is that really how you see it? How else should I see it? You came home one Tuesday, told me you needed space to reevaluate your priorities, and moved out while I was visiting my sister that weekend. The pain felt fresh again, standing in this room with him. 2 weeks later, your lawyer contacted me about divorce proceedings. You never even told me why. Mason ran both hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered well from our marriage. I told you we wanted different things. That's not a reason, Mason. That's a platitude. He was silent for a long moment, watching Olivia sleep against my shoulder. She looked so peaceful, he said finally. Don't change the subject. I'm not. His voice had an edge now. I'm looking at my daughter, a daughter I didn't know existed until 20 minutes ago, and realizing how much I've already missed. Her birth. Her first smile. Everything. That wasn't my choice alone, I reminded him. You made yourself unreachable. Because I thought it was better for you. The words burst out of him with unexpected force. Cleaner. Less painful. Less painful? I stared at him in disbelief. You disappeared from my life without explanation after 8 years of marriage, and you thought that was less painful? Then watching you realize you'd wasted those years with someone who couldn't give you what you wanted. Yes. I shifted Olivia to my other shoulder, trying to make sense of his words. What are you talking about? What couldn't you give me? Mason looked away, jaw tight. Children, he said finally. A family. The word hung between us, heavy with implications I couldn't immediately process. Mason, that doesn't make any sense. We agreed to wait until your position at the company was secure before starting a family. And then the medical results came back. What medical results? I felt suddenly cold, despite the room's perfect temperature. He met my eyes directly, something vulnerable and raw in his expression. I was diagnosed with a condition that makes it extremely unlikely I could father children. The specialists gave me less than a 3% chance. The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. When? 3 months before I left. After the physical for the new insurance policy. And you didn't tell me? My voice rose despite Olivia sleeping against me. You made that decision for both of us. I knew how much you wanted children, he said quietly. I saw your face every time your sisters brought their kids around. How you'd light up holding your nieces and nephews. So instead of talking to me, letting me have any say in our future, you just left. I thought I was setting you free to find someone who could give you the family you deserved. The irony was almost too perfect, too painful. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that made Olivia stir against me. And yet here we are, I said, gesturing to our sleeping daughter. With living proof of that spectacular 3% chance. Mason's expression shifted as the full implications sank in. She really is mine, he whispered, wonder and confusion mingling in his voice. DNA would confirm it, but yes. There hasn't been anyone else, Mason. Not during our marriage, not since. He moved closer, reaching out tentatively to touch Olivia's back with gentle fingertips, as if confirming her solidity. I never imagined, he began, then stopped, swallowing hard. All this time, I've been thinking I did the right thing, the honorable thing, by walking away. And instead you missed 7 months of her life, I finished for him. And I've been raising your child alone because you didn't trust me enough to make decisions about our future together. The door opened again, and Portia stood there, her composure now visibly frayed at the edges. Mason, people are leaving, she said tightly. This is becoming embarrassing. He straightened, conflict evident in every line of his body. Portia, I need to deal with this situation. The situation, she repeated flatly, her gaze moving between Mason and Olivia. Is that what we're calling it? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Her voice was controlled, but anger simmered beneath. Let's be clear, your ex-wife has shown up at our engagement party with a baby she claims is yours, and you're hiding in here instead of addressing it. The baby is his, I interjected, my patience wearing thin. I understand this is difficult, but Olivia isn't a situation or a claim. She's a person. His daughter. Portia's carefully constructed facade cracked further. How convenient that you've decided to reveal this now, just as we announce our engagement. I didn't know about your engagement until I received the invitation, I repeated. Someone wanted me here tonight, but it wasn't me. A flash of something guilt. Awareness? Crossed Portia's face so quickly I almost missed it. You sent the invitation, Mason said quietly, studying her with new intensity. Didn't you? Don't be ridiculous, she replied, but a flush crept up her neck. Portia. His voice had a new edge. Did you know about Olivia before tonight? The silence stretched, damning in its length. Your mother mentioned there had been complications with your divorce, she finally said. I had my assistant look into it. There were medical records. You accessed my private medical records? Mason's voice was dangerously quiet. I needed to know what I was getting into, Portia defended. The prenatal visits were flagged in the insurance review. I thought I assumed you knew and were hiding it from me. So you orchestrated this public revelation. Mason's disbelief was palpable. At our engagement party, I thought if she was the type to hide your child from you, she'd never have the courage to show up, Portia said, her calculated gamble exposed. I was wrong. The realization that I'd been manipulated into this confrontation landed like a blow. I'd played right into her hands, creating exactly the scene she'd wanted, just not with the outcome she'd expected. I think you should go, Mason told Portia, his voice leaving no room for argument. Mason will discuss this tomorrow. The finality in his tone was familiar to me from boardroom negotiations I'd witnessed years ago. Right now, I need to meet my daughter properly. Portia's face hardened into something closer to the shrewd businesswoman she was reputed to be, rather than the poised fiancée she'd presented earlier. This isn't over, she said, and left without closing the door behind her. If you've ever had someone make decisions about your life without consulting you, hit that like button and comment respect my choice below. No one should have their agency taken away by someone else's assumptions. Mason moved to shut the door, then turned to face me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. I owe you an apology, he said simply. Several, in fact. Yes, you do. I adjusted Olivia, who was beginning to wake. But right now, I think you should properly meet your daughter. I gestured for him to sit on the leather sofa against the wall. When he did, I carefully placed Olivia in his arms again, guiding his hands into the right positions. Hello, Olivia, he said softly, his voice catching. I'm your father. She looked up at him with those familiar gray eyes, reaching one tiny hand to pat his cheek with surprising gentleness. The gesture, so innocent and accepting, seemed to undo something in him. His eyes filled, one tear spilling over before he could blink it away. She's perfect, he whispered. She is, I agreed, watching them together with a complicated ache in my chest. What happens now? He asked, not looking up from Olivia's face. I don't know, I answered honestly. I came here thinking I was just going to tell you about her, make sure she had her father in her life. I didn't expect any of this. Neither did I. He finally looked up at me. But I want to be part of her life, Emily. Whatever that means, however, we need to arrange it. I've already missed too much. It won't be simple, I warned. There's a reason I waited. Your life, your world, it's complicated. So we'll uncomplicate it, he said with a flash of the determination that had built his reputation. Starting tonight. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to introduce my daughter to the people who matter, he said, rising carefully with Olivia secure in his arms. Then we're going to figure out the rest. Together. If you'll let me. The word together hung between us, loaded with possibility and shadowed by our shared history. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, co-parents, tentative friends, something else entirely, but as I watched Mason holding our daughter with reverent care, I felt something shift and realign. We had both made mistakes. We had both caused pain. But the tiny person between us deserved better than our broken past. She deserved a future built on truth, however complicated that truth might be. Together, I agreed cautiously. For Olivia. His smile was tentative but real, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him all night. For Olivia, he echoed. And maybe, someday, for us too. I didn't answer that part. Some possibilities were too fragile to acknowledge yet. But as we prepared to face the curious crowd beyond the door, I felt the weight I'd carried for months begin to lighten. Whatever happened next, we would face it standing side by side, connected by the tiny miracle neither of us had believed possible. The hallway outside the library was empty, but the murmur of voices from the ballroom confirmed that many guests remained, likely held by the promise of scandal. Mason paused at the threshold, adjusting Olivia more securely against his chest. Are you sure about this? I asked quietly. Once you acknowledge her publicly, there's no going back. I've already lost 7 months, he replied. I'm not losing another minute. We walked back into the ballroom together, not quite touching but unmistakably united. The reaction rippled through the crowd in waves, first silence, then whispers, then a collective intake of breath as people noticed the baby in Mason's arms. Victoria approached immediately, her aristocratic features composed despite the unprecedented situation. "Mason?" she asked, the single word carrying volumes of meaning. "Mother, I'd like you to officially meet your granddaughter, Olivia Jane Riley." Mason's voice carried clearly across the hushed room. "She'll be 7 months old next week." Victoria's gaze moved from the baby to me, then back to Mason. A series of calculations seemed to run behind her eyes, public relations implications, family dynamics, legal considerations before she made her decision. "She's beautiful," Victoria said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "And unmistakably in Everett." Her posture softened slightly as she reached out one perfectly manicured finger, which Olivia promptly grabbed. "Strong grip too," she added with the ghost of a smile. Across the room, I spotted Portia standing with an older couple who had to be her parents, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed fury. The Callaways were old Boston society, I remembered, with a reputation for ruthless preservation of their dignity. This public revelation would not be easily forgiven. Mason began moving through the crowd, still holding Olivia, introducing her to key board members and longtime family friends with the same pride he might have shown announcing a record-breaking quarter. I followed at a slight distance, watching my daughter charm the social elite with her serious gaze and occasional gurgle. "Ladies and gentlemen." Mason's voice cut through the buzz of conversation after we'd made a complete circuit of the room. "I apologize for the interruption to our celebration. As you can see, this evening has brought unexpected